Alright, so let's talk about Polyphemos, one of the weakest companies in Terraforming Mars. And yeah, I just basically wanted to do what I did with you and MI, doing a quick video this time, instead of 2 long ones on how to play it, basic strategies, and how to basically be a little better with it, even though I think it's really hard. So let's take a look at Polyphemos. Polyphemos, well, as you can see, they are cash rich, right? 50 cash, 5 titanium, so that's a total of 65, and it's pretty flexible because most of it is cash. 5 production, that's insane, but well, no tax, and instead of a good effect or no effect, it has a shed effect, which is buying cards cost 5. Now, I explained this in my recent video where I ranked Colonies corporations, where I've heard my friends and people make the case that, well, if you buy 2 cards on average per generation, that's 4 extra cash and you're producing 5, so it kind of evens out. The thing about that reasoning is that, yeah, that's true, but then you got a corporation with no skill. So if you had a corporation that had 1 cash production and no effect, would that be good? No, and that's what Polyphemos is on its best case scenario under that logic. Of course, you could buy 1 card and then you got money, but you will you'll be making way more money than you can. Basically 25 income to start with, and buying 1 card, that's a lot of money to not do. You won't be using your money, right? So you need to find another way to get cards, and that's the thing with Polyphemos. So it's a very weak corporation, and you really need to get around that weakness it has. And of course, if you're buying more than 3 cards, you're just probably losing the game unless you get some insane help from your hand. But yeah. So let's talk about the general strategies that I would recommend with Polyphemos. So first of all, I think the most obvious one is science. And so if you go for an Indian science game, it's still a bit tricky. You need to learn a few things. I'll get into more detail with that. But yeah, with science, you need continuous card draw, Pluto, or the scientists. And I'll get into how each expansion affects it, but basically without Turmoil and Colonies, but especially Turmoil, I would not play this corporation. Because Pluto and the Scientists are reliable ways to play, to basically do something. And a very tricky thing about going for this science is that you have to get used to relying on your random draws. And so cards that you think are okay or good and you would normally buy with our corporation, something like sponsors, you don't buy those cards with Polyphemos. You rely on your random draws for those cards, and you buy the absolutely very good cards that you cannot let go by. Like, I mean, not just Earth Catapult, like a level below that too, but basically those are the cards you buy. Now the other thing you can do is just go very heavy engine with a little science. You still need a little science, and just basically suck up some of your weakness by just trying to outcash everyone and building a very strong economy. Now there's a few preludes that could help with that, but preludes are generally not good for you. I'll get into that as well. But what you want to focus if you go for this strategy is Jovians, because they're basically big cards with lots of income, right? And they also give you lots of points, which is the way you're going to probably win the game. And the other thing is big income cards. So again, not things like sponsors, because that card becomes very inefficient. Even things like acquired company, probably not, but yeah, bigger things like asteroid mining. And finally, okay, don't think that you can't terraform with Polyphemos. Remember, terraforming are usually, when you go for like a heavy terraforming game, you usually play less cards, which is good if you think about it. With Polyphemos, it means you probably buy less cards. You just have to be really efficient. So basically asteroids that get you lots of steps, I would say 2 or more, but the big ones even better, and efficient plant production that will, you can use your plants to terraform and it doesn't require cards to do so. Yeah, basically heavy, very expensive heat prod, or very efficient plant prod, and then focus your game on that in a combination with standard projects, which, I mean, you don't get a discount on them, but because your economy is so good, they affect you less, and so you can rely on them a little more. But yeah, those are the basic strategies. Now let's talk about some common mistakes. So first of all, small cards, and like I said, let's say B and C tier cards that with many corporations you would buy, you don't buy them with Polyphemos. That you really have to just rely on drawing those cards. Same thing basically with nearly all energy production, except obviously the quantum extractor, and I always forget the name of it, mass converter. Those are great, but every other energy production, like, they're all pretty average or bad, right? So you don't buy those with Polyphemos. Cities, same thing. You don't buy cities with Polyphemos unless they're research outposts, basically. And you might see a good city. It might be a second best card in your draft, but you really try to only buy the first and then hope you get a city, unless you're desperate for it. I mean, you want to collect mayor or something. You have to rely on your random draws for those kind of cards. They're the kind of B tier cards that there's a lot of energy production, cities, early income production, that kind of thing. You need to rely on the random draws, and especially don't play small cards. Second mistake I see players make is waste your initial income and initial cash and income, and so especially buying 6 or 7 cards. 6 or 7 cards for Polyphemos is 30-35, which means you're left with 25, which is still good, but the thing is that you just wasted half of your advantage, right? I try to keep 3 or 4. Very heavy income cards or terraforming cards, or card draw. If you see card draw, you can't let it go. It's persistent card draw, that is. But yeah, you cannot, like, you see the 50 starting cash and you just ignore your weakness. Don't ignore your weakness. Your weakness will slowly but surely bleed you to death and make you lose the game. So do not waste your initial income buying a bunch of cards. Third mistake I see people make is that they don't terraform. They think this is purely a ninja comparison, but really, if you think about it, the longer the game goes, the more time your effect spends in play. So if you see a terraforming hand, you go for it. You use standard projects. Heavy plant production is not gonna be a super rush, right? Because you have to develop basically heat or plant from scratch. But you can be the terraformer and put pressure on the other player, and you have a bit more flexibility to pay some of the bigger terraforming cards and some of the asteroids, right? You have some starting titanium that's really nice. And finally, the most important mistake, and the one I see people commit the most, is misplaying Colonies and Turmoil. Now, I will discuss these expansions in detail, but basically you want to do Pluto and Scientist, like I say nearly all the time. Often synergy with Polyphemos is overrated. A little less so with Colonies, a little more so with Turmoil, but I'll get into that when I'll discuss the expansion separately. But yeah, these are the 4 main mistakes I see people make. So let's talk about the cards that help or don't help Polyphemos. So, like I said, the most important thing is card draw and persistent card draw. So research doesn't matter. The problem with that is that there isn't that much. And so let's look at the tap action draw cards that exist in the game. So first of all, Invention Guild, Inventors Guild, and Business Network, those still, your abilities still count for those, so those don't work. Just ignore them. Then you have Development Center, AI Central, and Restrictor Area. These are the base game ones. Now, AI Central by itself, if you think you can get the science reasonably, is to me enough to play this. Development Center and Research Area are both good options, but they might not be enough. They're an extra random card, and you're trying to buy at least one less card, so you're trading basically one known card for one random card to sort of like alleviate your weakness. So it's like if you have one of these, you still gotta aim for one more. Then the expansions brought us Red Spot Observatory and Aerial Mappers. Both of these can be, I mean, they're basically half as good. They're cheaper, but half as good. Red Spot Observatory is a little faster, and because it's expensive and you don't care so much about that, it's like play this in the first round if you can for sure. But they're a little bit slower, so you know if restricted area development center are not enough, these two are definitely also not enough. But a combination of like one of those and one of these gets you an extra card and a half per turn. That might work. But yeah. Then High Tech Lab is great. If you're playing with the promo cards, High Tech Lab is great for you. It's probably a second best, or even best, just even better than AI Central. I might consider because you just see so many cards. You gotta your energy up, but you might do that with standard projects if you need to. You can start at one energy and then just wait too. You don't need to have it high. But the ability to see a lot of cards and draw the big expensive one and play that one is great for Polyphemos. So High Tech Lab for Polyphemos, I think it's better than AI Central. There's one more card besides High Tech Lab that draws you card, and that's Subcrust Measurement. It's one of the promos. It's pretty expensive, but it's one card draw a turn and it doesn't cost anything, so this is one you definitely want. It comes with 2 victory points and it has a requirement. It was one of the better ones, so I would rank it up there with Development Center and Restricted Area, not as good as High Tech Lab and AI Central. But then let's talk about the effect draws, and there's 3. There's Mars University, Olympus Conference, and Spin-off Department. Now, the problem with the first 2, which are great cards in the game, with Mars Universities, that you need at least to have, first another card that's drawing you random cards, so that you have some, fuel to discard, because you can't be discarding the cards that you buy for 5, because then you're not doing anything, right? And the other problem with Mars University, it's that you need to play a lot of science tags to get the most out of it, and with Polyphemos you're looking to play less cards, because you're probably looking to do draw less cards. Now, Olympus Conference has basically the same problem. You need double the tags to get the same amount of cards in Mars University. You need to discard, but yeah. So these 2 would rank pretty low for me, for Polyphemos, for what you're looking for. I mean, they're obviously great cards, and if you get them, you would play them, but do not think that you have your card draw situation solved because you have these 2. Finally, Spin-off Department. This card is stupid. So it's great. It also gives you income, so you would always play this again. And like I said, you're looking to play expensive cards. You might play more expensive cards than science tags with Polyphemos. So yeah, this is actually quite good. But it's still maybe not enough. Like all of these need like the only 2 that by themselves pretty much like make your game workable are High Tech Lab and AI Central. Okay, but then let's talk about Pluto and the Scientists. And yeah, basically, if Turmoil and Colonies are in the game, and Polyphemos is a Colonies corporation, but they don't need to be, then you are basically this is what you're focusing on. You need to put all your colonies on Pluto if you can, and all your reps into the Scientist, and I'll discuss again this in detail, but yeah, these are, if either Pluto or a Scientist are in play, then you might get away with some of the level 2 or level 3 draws that I mentioned. Now let's talk about terraforming cards. So this is obviously if you're going for a terraforming strategy, and what you will want there is all the big asteroids, so giant ice asteroid, Deimos, but anything that does 2, like big asteroid, ice asteroid, lava flows, comet and towing a comet, everything that gets you 2 steps, it's probably worth it. But then also NRA. NRA might be the most important card, and I mean it's an asteroid, but it's also a plant producer. And since I mentioned it, let's get into the plants. So NRA, pretty much the usual subjects. Again, you're looking for the very efficient one. You're not looking to build. This is something I would recommend with almost any corporation. Don't do the one card plant production cards, but focus more on the ocean ones because you might be able to force the oceans in faster because of your good economy. If you have to play one or two standard oceans to play some cards, then that's fine. So kelp farming, algae, and Arctic algae would be probably the best three cards aside from NRA. And then insects, probably always keep insects, but that's not gonna be what's gonna build your plant production. That's more of a end game killer. And then nitrophilic moss just because it's oceans, and trees because it gives you 3. Those are the plant production cards that I would focus on with Polyphemos, but then again, those are the ones that I almost use exclusively with any other corporation. There's one more, and I'll get into heat, but that's methane from Titan. And again, you can go for a bit of a Jovian / terraforming strategy with these. This one's tricky to play. You need 2%, and you want to play it early. The good thing is that you start with titanium. Maybe you get an oxygen prelude, or maybe you get something like experimental forest or something like that, and you can play this Gen 1, and you can use your 5 titanium on that. But it also gives you heat, so that brings us into heat. And so for heat, there's not that much. You need the expensive one. So that there's basically 4. I mean 5 if you count methane, but I play methane more for the plants than the heat. But yeah, Solera, Mohole area, and solar reflectors if you're playing with colonies, which you probably are. And then being from a thorium asteroid. Again, this has the problem of it being like a hybrid Jovian thing, so you're paying for points and production, and you're getting 3S energy, and you need a Jovian card before it, so it's a little tricky, but definitely worth it if you get it early. But yeah, that's it for terraforming cards. Finally, let's talk about, because we're in the terraforming thing, standard tech. And standard tech is great with Polyphemos. First of all, it's a science tag, which might combo with some of your card draw, or might be a requirement for AI Central or subcrest measurement. But more importantly, because you're rich, it helps you place oceans to play faster plant cards. It helps you close out the game. If the heat is lagging and you have a bunch of money, 11 per heat, you can get 5 heat steps. I've definitely, if you have 55 cash, you can get 5. Well, you actually need 58 because it's a rebate. But yeah, you can get the last heat steps with these. So standard technology is a card that you draft and keep with Polyphemos. Okay, finally, let's talk about the heavy engine cards. Now, as I said, you want to focus on big cards that build a lot of money production, and probably titanium, right? So one example I like to give is comparing sponsors and card company. These two cards together give you 5 production, and they cost 16 plus 6 to buy them both, 22, right? With any corporation. With Polyphemos, you play an extra 4 to buy them both for 26. Now, if you compare that to lunar mining gives you 5 production, the same, and to buy it, it's 19 plus 3, that's 22. So, typically, it's the same as acquired company and sponsors, but because you're Polyphemos, actually, lunar mining is much better. And, I mean, it's flexible. You get 1 less earth tag, I guess. But, yeah, this is just to show why it's important to focus on bigger and more expensive economy builders than the cheaper ones. And so, lunar mining, asteroid mining, ion mining industries, and of course the big guy, Earth Elevator. Yeah, these are cards that you definitely want to focus on early. If you buy one of these and you pay an extra 2, and if you play Earth Elevator the first generation, you're doing great. Of course, you have to go for space after that, but yeah, focus on heavy income builders, and if you can gear it towards Jovian, even better, because then you know where your points might come from, and that goes well with the science that you might have in hand. Yeah, to me, those are the best cards for Polyphemos in the game overall. And now let's talk about the boards. Okay, so Polyphemos and the boards. I think the worst board for Polyphemos is Tharsis. Basically, the milestones, you could go for Mayor if you get maybe a Space City and some standard projects, or you can maybe force Gardener with a Terraforming hand. You're definitely not going for a Planner. Terraformer is really hard to get, and building tags tend to be cheap, and playing 8 of them quick will be hard for Polyphemos despite your good economy. So plus you don't even start with a tag. So yeah, I don't think so. Basically, you have to force yourself into Mayor or Gardener, right? And then for the awards, you're probably good on Scientist and Banker. You don't have a direct advantage, but yeah, I mean, you should do something along those lines. But other than that, there's not much for you. Tharsis is also a pretty good ground game kind of map, so if you get Terraforming Hand, that's good, but other than that, I think Tharsis is the worst map. Hellas, it's a little better. If you go Jovian, you have Rim Settler. Polar Explorer is doable if you get one tile. You can force a couple of cities there. Diversifier is definitely not for you. Energizer is definitely not for you. And Tactician, it's weird. It's hard to say who that is for, but it's probably not for you. And then in terms of awards, I mean, the thing is, like, Space Baron, it's space tax, but it requires playing a lot of space tax, right? So again, you want to play a few very good cards. Eccentric definitely not for you, Contractor not for you, Magnate not for you, and Cultivator not for you. So Hellas, a little better on the milestones, but pretty bad on the awards still. And then finally, Elysium. I think Elysium is the map for you. It's not that it's great, but it is definitely better. Because mainly of Specialists. You have a major advantage on Specialists. You start with 5 cash production, you get 5 more, and you're there. Other than that, I mean, you're obviously not going to win Tycoon. You might get Ecologist. Like, 4 is a low enough number that if you get a Prelude or, you can play something like Design Ecosystems, which a lot of other green corporations can't because it's so expensive. You can afford to. So you might get Ecologist and you might get Legend because, again, it's a low number. It's 5 and the events might be good for you. But Generalist and Tycoon are definite no. So here you have a big advantage on one and 2 feasible ones. So I think this is the best match for you. Now it's very ground focused, so you probably need a terraforming kind of hand. And then on the awards, Celebrity is definitely for you. And then Desert Settler, if you go for ground game, you can force it and you might be able to standard parade your way into it. State Dealer, no, because it's usually covered before. And Industrialist and Benefactor, probably not, but I mean, Benefactor maybe. Again, you have to go for a ground game here in Elysium. Now let's talk about the expansions. And it's a little weird because I feel like the expansions affect Polyphemos very differently than every other corporation. Let's start with Preludes. And Preludes is just straight up a bad expansion for Polyphemos. Now, the thing is, like, I think 99% of people play with Preludes, so it's probably going to be there, but just know that if Preludes are in the game, it's probably a bit of a better choice, and that's because the Preludes do basically 4 things. Production, terraforming, direct cash, and cards, right? And 3 of those things you're not that much interested in. Like, the early terraforming, maybe a little. The cash, you're rich already. The production, you already have it. And the cards you want, right? So that's the main thing that you do want. But the thing is that there are less cards that are going to help you. that are going to help corporations that need cash for production, because there's lots of cash and production cards, preludes in there. And so let's talk about the preludes that help you. So there's 7 preludes right now that draw cards. I think that's going to change with Prelude 2, and with Prelude 2, Polyphemos might get better. But right now it's not. So first of all, there's 2 that draw you 1 card. UNMI Contractor and I Research Outpost. And these are both, I mean, UNMI Contractor is good, but it's 1 card is not going to make a real difference. And I Research Outpost is just pretty bad, even though it has the science and the Jovian, it's pretty bad. And 1 card, again, is not a huge difference. So these 2 preludes help you a little bit, but they're not good enough. Then you have the ones that give you 2 cards. And there's 3 of them, but let's talk about 2 of them separately. And the problem with these is that they give you specific cards. Now, ASA is actually pretty great. You don't really need the 6 Titanium right now, but it does draw you 2 space types, which might be 2 Jovians, or 2 very good income cards that you play in the first generation, so that's a better one. Experimental Forest is also a very good prelude. It adjusts you to plant tags. The thing about this is that they're not, like, you have to be either already know that you're going for space or already know that you're going for plants, or otherwise the prelude is useless. Like, if you see both of these, you're unlikely to take both, because they sort of don't, have a lot of synergy with each other. And finally, we get to the ones that are better. So, Biolab. Okay, it's a plant production, but it's 3 cards and a science tag, which again might help you play AI Central or something. So Biolab is definitely a card I would pick with Polyphemos, but the real best one I think is Research Network. Instead of a plant, it gives you a cash, which it's more flexible. If you're going engine, you don't really want that plant Biolab, and it gives you a wild tag and the 3 cards. The same 3 cards. So these are really the 2 best preludes for you, except for Corporate Archives. And so this is one of the promo preludes, and that's why I left it for last. It gives you some cash that you don't care about that much, but it lets you look at 7 cards and take 2. And for Polyphemos, this is just a godsend. I mean, I think this prelude is honestly broken, but I would pick this with almost anyone, but for Polyphemos, this is a godsend. Just, you see 7 cards, you're gonna see 2 that you really like. And now you have a plan with Polyphemos. But there's basically 3 preludes that I really like to see with Polyphemos, and then maybe 4 with ASA. Whereas with every other corporation, not only they have more that help them, they have some, like Ecoline has a bunch of preludes that save them. Tharsis, like every plant, every city, every energy, every steel prelude helps them. So yeah, I think playing with preludes is sort of a disadvantage. But yeah, now Venus. Venus might be worse for Polyphemos. Why? It's not a huge source of points. It does rely on getting a lot of synergy and playing a lot of Venus cards. And it doesn't terraform quickly. A lot of the cards in Venus are underwhelming, so you're looking basically at diluting the deck. Of all the cards that you're basically diluting the deck with a bunch of cards that you're unlikely to use. And so I think for that reason Venus is just straight up bad for Polyphemos. Okay, but let's talk about Colonies. And this usually you're playing, because it's a Colonies corporation, you'll be playing with Colonies. And okay, let's talk about Colonies. So the main thing is Pluto in game, right? If Pluto is in game, then I would say that you're kind of safe. And I would also say that you place your first colony there, and if you get a card that places like another colony there, you place that too. I mean, the draw this card, like you could make the same argument I make with Mars University, except that every time you draw this card, you're gonna probably draw a bunch of cards, because with the colony marker being all the way down, all the way to the second colony or the first colony, then you're gonna be drawing 3-4 cards every generation and then discarding 1 or 2, right? So yeah, definitely focus on Pluto. It doesn't matter, like, even if you're even if you're terraforming, you probably want to focus on Pluto early, but if you're terraforming, you do want to look at Io. And Io is a colony that is very often ignored. I wouldn't place a colony there, but I would definitely trade there for heat whenever possible. When people will be busy blocking Pluto, then you go for Io. And then Ganymede. If you're terraforming, Ganymede is really good. If you're not terraforming, you're probably looking at either Pluto and Luna or Pluto and one of the point ones. But yeah. So Pluto should always be your first choice until maybe late in the game, but then keep Io and Ganymede in mind for when you're terraforming, because they can really help accelerate the game. And finally, Turmoil. So Turmoil is actually the best expansion for Polyphemos. Even though it's a Colonies expansion, Turmoil to me is the one that makes it playable. And that's for one and one reason only, the Scientists. So think about it. With the Scientists, you can pay 10 to draw 3 cards, so you're playing 3 1/3 for 3 cards instead of the usual 5, right? So you basically get it done to a normal price. Now, these are random, these are not the ones you buy in the draft. But the thing is that you can exploit this more than other players, because now when you do it like this, now your cash production is an advantage. Now your huge starting income is an advantage, right? And other players might not even be able to activate this every turn, because it's quite expensive. It's it's really nice for you that it's not pay 3 per card. It's pay 10 for 3 or don't pay at all. And paying 10 for 3, it's hard early in the game for weaker economies. And if they do so, then they might not be able to play the cards, and you will, right? So yeah, the Scientists get the other thing is, because of your starting cash, you're really able to bully people with Turmoil. Just basically, I usually, my first move is getting my free delegate and my other delegate there, depending on what comes on the neutral ones. But basically, taking over with 2 is really important. If there's a party already with 2 in there, then you might think about waiting until the second, placing your free one there and not rushing it, because you don't want to pay 10 to take over. But you really need to bully people with this fast and get the Scientist in there. But let's talk about the other parties, because there might be cases where you want to play them. So first of all, Mars first is probably the worst one for you. It's steel. You really don't play a lot with steel with Polyphemos, and you really don't want to place a lot of tiles early. So Mars first is one that it's easy to say no. Now let's talk about the Calvinist, because you might be thinking, okay, one of the ways that I mentioned to play this is just play Solera or Moho. And at that point, you might think, okay, the Calvinists get me some additional money, and that helps me buy cards. And so, if you have Solera, you play the Scientists. Just keep playing the Scientists. The Calvinists suck. Their ability is not going to help you for anything. Yeah, they'll get you a little more cash than the Scientists, but the Scientists will draw you cards, which is essentially like getting cash for you, right? And because you have to learn to live with your random draws, you want more random draws. So yeah, and then if you have science, even more reason to play a Scientist, because you also get money. Now, if you have plant production and are playing greeneries that regeneration, the greens, no, play the Scientists. Again, you cash, the 4 cash you get from the placing the greenery is not better than the ability to draw 10 cards for 3, which is it's essentially 6 cash for you, right? And so at the end of the game, if you're placing multiple greeneries, then yes, the greens. But at the beginning of the game, even if you can't place a greenery that turn, you go Scientists. Finally, let's talk about you start with Titanium. Unity actually gives you 5 more money, because you start with 5 Titanium, right? So it's worth 1 more, it's 5 more money. And it goes with dice that you want to play, and so in this case, you play the Scientist. And again, it's basically getting you 6 cash or well, 5 cash really for drawing the 3 cards, but you really need those card draw more than you need unity. You can just force the scientist there every time you want, and you take advantage of the other ones when other players force them in. Because someone's gonna want to put unity there, someone's gonna want to put the greens there, but you always focus on the scientist because you want the scientist there as often as possible. And then when someone puts unity in, that's the regeneration you spend all your titanium. Or you place your greeneries. I mean, your greeneries you might have to place early if you're rushing, but whatever. At the end of the game, again, then you might go for unity, then you might go for the greens. I would never go for the colonists. Finally, there's one more, and this one, okay, if you're facing a rusher, you do play the reds. That's the only case where I don't go scientist. Like the reds destroy rushers so horribly, and then you can like put the reds in and have the scientists as a backup, but mostly put the reds in and keep them out. Just don't let the greens get into power if someone's rushing the game. But yeah, I would mostly pace a scientist, and if I have a very aggressive and economy poor rusher like an Ecoline, then you might want to do the reds early. Once they get going, the reds are not going to stop them, so then even though they get more steps per generation, and so they have to pay this more, but yeah, and the reds are also getting you a point when you put them, which none of the other parties do, so there's that. But yeah, remember, scientist. Anyway, that's my Polyphemos video. As a final thought, like, it is a weak corporation. I would say it's one of the ones that plays more differently than the rest. So I would encourage everyone to try it, but then I understand, and that was what I did. After you try it, like, it's fun the first time, and then you never want to play with it again because it's different, but it's not great. The effect is the fun part of the corporation, and this one is not fun. So, and then you need so much going for you that I don't blame you. So yeah, I would say definitely try it. Follow my advice, and yeah, if you don't want to play it ever again, I understand. But anyway, that's all I have. Let me know what you think, and see you next time.